Welcome to a new episode of the Tolkien Experience podcast. I'm Luke Shelton.
I'm Sarah Westvick.
And I'm Sarah Brown.
Each episode, we share with you an interview of a Tolkien scholar or fan.
That's right. In these interviews, one of us asks our guests to respond to 6 questions that help us learn about their personal Tolkien experience.
All of this is made possible by our supporters on Patreon. So we want to thank them and encourage you to check out the community at patreon.com/Tolkien Experience.
We are so excited to share this podcast with you. So without any more delay, let me introduce our guest. My guest today is relatively new as a voice in the Tolkien community, but he has very quickly made a name for himself with informative and entertaining videos on his YouTube channel, The Nerd of the Rings. On his channel, Matt hosts charity live streams, has Lord of the Rings Lego gaming sessions, but really he's most well known for his deep dives into Middle-earth lore. So without any further ado, I'm going to dive straight into my interview with Matt. So Matt, how were you first introduced to Tolkien's work?
So I first discovered Tolkien through a friend when I went to college. It was actually my best friend in high school. We were roommates in college freshman year, and we showed up on move-in day, made a trip to the local Walmart to get stuff for our dorm, and we come across the movie section, and we were going to pick out a couple movies to buy and watch that night, and he picks up a copy of Fellowship of the Ring. And he says, we should check this out. And I think my exact words were something like, that looks kind of dumb. I'm not sure about that. And needless to say, I was incredibly wrong. And he talked me into it. And by the time I was, an hour in, maybe, I was absolutely hooked. And by the time they get to the Argonath, I was just blown away and had this burning desire to know more. You see the Argonath there, and just looking at them, there's a history there that they don't bother really explaining. But I knew there was some kind of story there because of what had come before it. I was like, this is the kind of world that has a story behind those statues. And then it gets to the end of the movie, and it just ends. And I had no idea that there was multiple. And so I turned to him like, what the heck did you just get me into? Like, it just ended. And he's like, yeah, that's weird. I forgot it ended like that. And then I looked up online, and lo and behold, there's a second movie coming out in just a few months. And it was just a steady plunge down the rabbit hole at that point.
So you were brought into Tolkien's world really through Peter Jackson's visual adaptation?
Absolutely. Yeah. I actually, I got the books the night that I went and saw Two Towers in theaters. I went to a bookstore right around the corner from the movie theater. And it was at that point that I realized there was The Hobbit as well. And at that point, my mind was blown like, oh my gosh, there's not 3 books, there's 4. And this is way before I came to discover the Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales. Like, it was, I had no idea, how much of the situation was just the tip of the iceberg.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, from that point, like I said, I bought the books, and then over the next couple months, I plowed through all 4 books and absolutely loved it.
I have a question for you because you came to the books from the movies. How much do you feel like your kind of mental image of the characters or the world is influenced by Peter Jackson?
Definitely. It's that's a really interesting question. I do have a hard time, like, for instance, Gandalf. I have a hard time picturing anyone other than Ian McKellen in that role. But then also there's certain things like I feel like I've gotten to the point, because I've spent so much time both watching the movies, but also reading the books and listening to the audiobooks. I've got all these different versions of these characters and places in my head. So one, for example, would be Aragorn. Aragorn in the books behaves a lot differently to an extent, than Viggo Mortensen's portrayal in the films. He's much more reluctant in the films, whereas in the books, he's, pretty much from go. He's like, all right, I'm going to go do this thing, and, he tells everyone who cares to bring up the topic of his sword, who it is, what the sword is and how important it is. So yeah, it's this interesting thing where, Peter Jackson's adaptations have certainly formed the basis for my fandom. But I wouldn't say it's overbearing in any way to the point where I can't see beyond it, I guess, if that makes sense. I think in a way I was kind of lucky because it's odd to come to something through movies, but then like have such a deep love for both. I feel like I know there's a lot of people who had years with the books and, they have a really hard time with some things in the movies. Whereas me experiencing that for the first time, it's a lot easier pill for me to swallow. So it makes me curious, like what's going to happen with this, the Amazon show and stuff like that. Now that I've gotten all this book knowledge from stuff like that, what am I going to be like when that comes out?
Well, speaking as someone who did read the books first, I didn't have, a decade or anything. I had just a couple years, but I still have a hard time seeing anyone other than Ian McKellen as Gandalf. He so kind of supplanted my own mental picture because he just fit that role to a T to me. That's one of the things I've always loved about the Middle-earth films is I feel like they did a really good job with casting. And like we said, obviously the character of Aragorn was a little bit different, but I mean, Viggo I thought was absolutely fantastic. And, I love his Aragorn just like I love the book Aragorn. Casting is one of those things where I always felt, I mean, you look at those films and how many of those actors have gone on to be in other big productions and are still in big productions today. I mean, the Marvel movies pretty much just like, I think, take the cast list at this point from Lord of the Rings for all their villains and stuff. I guess that probably started all the way back with like X-Men, didn't it? With Magneto being Ian McKellen.
I think he was, I think that came out around the same time, but I guess Lord of the Rings they were probably filming really close to each other. Yeah.
So thinking about all of the different times that you've gone to Middle Earth for different reasons, what is your favorite part of the work? What stands out to you the most?
Yeah. So kind of what I alluded to before, with seeing the Argonath and knowing that there was a deep history there, that really blew me away. The fact that there was so much history, even looking, and it blows my mind because, when he wrote Lord of the Rings, he's referencing stuff in the Silmarillion that you don't really learn about in Lord of the Rings. So it's like, thank God for Christopher Tolkien. Otherwise, we'd just have these passing references to like, wow, that sounds really cool. I wonder what that's about. And we'd never know if it wasn't for Christopher Tolkien. So yeah, just the depth of the world and the complexity, but it also has its mysteries, like the Blue Wizards, for example. We don't really 100% know what their story is or what happened to them. And I like that there's some mystery, just like our own world, there's mysteries that we'll likely never know the answer to. So it just makes it feel so real, I guess, as real as a fantasy world can be.
Yeah. That reminds me of Michael Drought talks about there being textual ruins in the work. So like there are bits where he points to older works that we don't have access to. And actually Corey Olsen has also talked about like, imagine being a reader of The Lord of the Rings before the Silmarillion was published. And or imagine sitting with Tolkien as he's describing these different parts he's going to put into the work, and you're sitting there going, but no one has read all those other parts, Tolkien. Why are you doing this?
Right. It's like, I love it because I feel like nobody really does that anymore, where they just leave mysteries be mysteries. It's either there's whether in film or books, there's either a mystery because it's a plot hole and it was overlooked, or there's or they over explain and like everything is explained and tied up a little too neatly. So yeah, it's pretty cool that, as you're reading and the Fellowship is traveling south, and they talk about, like was it the ground or the rocks whispering and stuff, because of it's what used to be a Region. And, now we can dive deeper and know like, oh, a Region, that's where Celebrimbor was. That's where the Rings of Power were created. It's like, oh, who's Celebrimbor? Oh, well, let's go back to the first age. And he originated here. He was the son of this guy. It's like this amazing depth. But, also just having just enough mystery and things to keep us guessing and talking and theorizing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in the different times that you've come to Tolkien's work, is there one particular experience that stands out to you the most? Is it the readings that you do for your channel, or the very first time you encountered it personally? Which experience stands out to you the most?
Gosh, wow, that's that's a tough one. Obviously, like I said, the films were a huge point in my life because it really, Lord of the Rings is far and away, and Middle Earth is far and away my biggest fandom that I have, and the thing that I care the most deeply about, and in terms of fandoms, obviously I have my family and stuff. I care a great deal about them. So the film's like launching me into that. It's hard to top that. But after that, I got into audiobooks, and I remember Christopher Lee's reading of Children of Húrin. And it's spoiler alert, it's a very downer of a story for anyone who hasn't read it yet, but it is so good, and his performance is fantastic. And it really turned me on to some of the other audiobooks. So I went on to listen to the BBC dramatizations written by Brian Sibley, which are awesome. And then Silmarillion. If it wasn't for the audiobook to be able to follow along, I don't know if I would have gotten through Silmarillion the first time. That was a huge help. But then, it's just been a steady, to this point with the YouTube channel. It's just been kind of steadily diving deeper and deeper, and, researching things, and finding little nuggets here and there. I feel like every time I go back to the text, I find something new, or something that, I find, a bit more interesting than maybe I did before, or I glossed over before. And I'm like, oh, actually, that connection is really interesting to this other thing I was just reading in the Silmarillion, So yeah, I don't know if I could pinpoint. I just gave you a lot of pinpoints right there, but yeah, needless to say, they come all the time at this point, with researching on a weekly basis for the YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So since you're such a fan of the audiobooks, I have to ask, because it was just released, are you excited for the Andy Serkis audiobooks?
Absolutely. Yes. So let's see here. Where am I at? So what I did, I actually cheated a little bit, because I was so eager to listen to his performance that I skipped to the Bridge of Khazad-dûm chapter, and it did not disappoint. Spoiler alert, it was fantastic. And then I circled back, got back to the prologue concerning hobbits. And now I think I'm up to the point where Frodo's about to leave the Shire. So yeah, I have about an hour of commute time each workday. So I barreled through audiobooks pretty good. So I'm a big fan. But yeah, I thought Andy's, adaptation of the Hobbit audiobook was really good. So when I heard he was coming back for all 3 Lord of the Rings, I was really excited.
Yeah. I just actually got my copy. I haven't even started it yet, but I'm very excited.
Yeah, and he has such an interesting, I love his Gandalf, because it's quite a bit different from Ian McKellen. I feel like it's not the, kind of softer spoken, Andy Serkis just has like this deep, gravelly voice. So it almost feels like a bit more of a rough and tough Gandalf, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's for someone who was in the Peter Jackson movies. His ability to not be constrained by the voices of the actors in the movies is remarkable to me, because I feel like if I were involved in that project, I would just hear those voices in my head all the time.
Right. Just do impressions of all your friends.
Yeah, exactly. So before we did this interview, you actually did the text-based version. And in your response to this question, you mentioned that you enjoyed reading it with your children.
Yes, yeah.
And I wondered if you wanted to share a little bit of that experience with us as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's been one of the most fun things, honestly, from starting the YouTube channel that I did not anticipate, was my kids becoming more interested in Tolkien. So we've played things like I mentioned, like the Lego video games, Lego Lord of the Rings, Lego The Hobbit. Those are awesome and a lot of fun. So we'd play those, and then once they got to a certain age, I let them watch the movies, and they enjoyed them. But it's been so cool to see them. Like my oldest, he's 10, and he sat in the living room this morning and watched like 5 of my videos straight. And I was a little concerned because he was watching all the Morgoth and Sauron ones. And I'm like, you're going down a deep hole here, but maybe you should switch to one of the Hobbits or something for a bit. And then next thing I know, they're drawing, they're looking up how to draw Balrogs, and, like they love drawing things, and they're drawing pictures of Gandalf for me and Balrogs and stuff. It's just one of those things, for discovering it later in life myself, not till I was in college. It's pretty cool to see my young kids start to share that love and get really interested in the videos that I make, and the stories, and they'll ask me random questions on our way to school in the morning, and it's some pretty deep stuff too. I'm trying to remember what they were asking. They were asking about elves and immortality, and you're like, so elves live forever, but they can die if they're hurt really bad, right? It's like going really deep down the immortality rabbit hole a little bit. I was like, man, you guys are diving in the deep end.
Well, I have an essay for you to read. Yeah. That actually reminds me, there was this, when I was doing my PhD, which looked at the way that young readers respond to The Lord of the Rings. There's this fantastic researcher whose name escapes me at the moment. But she had a book where each chapter was basically her cataloging as kind of a sociological approach, where she was reading different books with her 2 young children. And one of those was The Hobbit. And so it's this wonderful little vignette of her talking about the way that her kids engaged with the stories, and how one of them didn't like that Bard slew the dragon instead of Bilbo. And so he went and he made his own story where Bilbo was the champion to put Bilbo back in the hero role.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just
so
love
cool.
the stories of young readers, and the kind of ingenuity and creativity and imagination they bring to the story, and the different ways they look at it. So
absolutely. Yeah, my 9-year-old, his favorite character is Gollum. He thinks Gollum is hilarious. He has a plush Gollum and everything, and so I haven't saw fit to tell him about the more darker parts of Gollum's past, but we'll just leave it at he's a cute stuffed animal for now.
Well, you gotta get the vocal cords warmed up for when you have to do the Gollum bits.
Oh yeah,
I'm sure.
Yeah. Gollum, the Gollum precious. That is one of the fun things of reading. I love reading to kids, and I always encourage people that have kids. They ask me about sharing Tolkien with him, and I'm like, read him The Hobbit and do voices. Like, I don't care how stupid you sound. Like, if you think you sound stupid, like, I'm pretty sure it's scientifically proven that it's more fun if you do voices.
Well, we have a new addition to our family this year. We have a little boy who
I saw that.
Yeah, he's 3 months now. Yeah. And so we have started through The Hobbit. We get about 2 pages at a time. But
you need the picture book version or something. I don't know if that's a thing, but it should be.
Yeah, we do have one that has like over 100 pictures in it, that kind of thing. It's pretty cool. But yeah, he will stare at me while I read, but as soon as you slip into a voice that's different from yours, he just starts smiling and gets really, really entranced. He's like, "Wait, you can change your voice? That's freaky."
See, he knows. He knows. He knows it's more fun if you do voices.
Well, I probably need to steer us back towards our questions.
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
So the next one that I usually like to ask is, do you feel like your approach to Tolkien's work has changed over time?
Yeah, I think, at first, it was just consuming the movies really. And, it was really focused on the movies, because it took me a while to even realize they were based on books. And then it was just kind of, I mentioned I kind of blew through the books, but even then it was just kind of a, it wasn't the, I don't know if I'd say obsession. I mean, I guess some people probably would call it obsession. But it wasn't to the same, level as it is now. It was just kind of like, oh, here's another cool thing to be another book that I have read. And, I just, I would read other things or, watch other movies, and, nothing nothing resonated the way that Middle Earth did. And I just, the more I dove into it, the more I was rewarded with, other great stories or, connections to the films I had seen or the stories, from the main Lord of the Rings as I'm diving into the Silmarillion. It was just an experience as far as a fantasy world that I had never experienced before or since. And then obviously with starting the YouTube channel, I'm in Middle Earth every week, which is amazing and fun. I pretty much, people ask me if I have, a system for picking topics, and not really. I just kind of think like, what do I want to learn more about this week? And I go with it. It's cool because, like I said before, if you have a question regarding something in Tolkien, like the Argonath example earlier, if you say, oh, I wonder if there's a story behind that, chances are there is. So it's really cool to be able to pick a random topic, a person, location, a sword even, and just dive in. It's definitely become more extreme, I guess, in the amount of research that I do on a given week.
So just more impassioned generally.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, I would, after I saw the films and, when I was still in college, I would procrastinate on schoolwork by like going on Tolkien Gateway and just going down a rabbit hole and getting lost in there. Next thing you know, I come up for air 2 hours later, but I know all this extra stuff now. So yeah, that was like, to date myself a little bit, when I was in college was kind of like when, Wikipedia and all these online wikis kind of took off. So Tolkien Gateway was the perfect thing at the perfect time for me.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I still fall into Tolkien Gateway occasionally. So.
Oh yeah, no, it's fantastic. I honestly, they were one of the first people I thought about when the new Nature of Middle Earth came out. I was like, oh my gosh, there's new writings. Like, the guys at Tolkien Gateway are going to have to update the website.
So at this point, the last question that I typically have on the text-based project is, would you recommend Tolkien's work? Why or why not?
Yeah, I think so. I pulled up my thing to see what I had said on the text, and I said yes, 1,000 times yes. So I will stick to that for sure. I love there's other franchises and book series and stuff. I love Star Wars, Harry Potter, a lot of fantasy stuff, but none of them I feel hold a candle to Middle Earth. Like there's something about Tolkien's writings, his characters, his themes. It's just a notch above, in my opinion. So yeah, one of the best things that I've experienced with my YouTube channel is people diving deeper into Middle Earth because of something they saw on the channel. I've had so many people say, I'm reading the Silmarillion for the very first time because of your YouTube videos, or, I've been watching these videos as I'm reading the Silmarillion, and it's so helpful in me actually finishing it this time. So I know, Silmarillion is, it's much more, difficult reading, I would say, than, Lord of the Rings. It's definitely got a, at times it feels like reading some of the more dense portions of the Bible a little bit, honestly. It's very epic in scale, but, there's not a lot of dialogue. And so, yeah, I sorry, I'm going down a rabbit hole here, but yeah, so I would 100% recommend Tolkien's World, and it's very rewarding for me when I can help people to either discover it or go deeper into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last question I have for you today is, what are you doing right now that our listeners could watch, get involved in, participate in? Is there anything that you'd like to give a shout out to? Yeah.
So the big thing really is my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Nerd of the Rings. I post videos predominantly on, lore. I'll go through, I love mapping out characters' travels. That was kind of the big video that really set my channel on a upward trajectory, was the complete travels of Gandalf. And I've just been busting out videos ever since. It's been a phenomenal run. October of last year, so almost a year ago, I was at 5,000 subscribers. And now today, I think I'm almost to 360,000. So it's been a crazy year. There's a lot of people on there. Definitely if you're one of those people that say, I need more Tolkien fans to talk to, there's plenty of them hanging out on the YouTube channel. I can tell you that.
Fantastic. So I said that was the last question. I lied a little bit.
That's all right. I do it all the time.
So of the different videos that you've put together, is there one or is there a series that has been kind of your favorite to create?
So one of the most fun to create would be, I'll start first. I'll say I feel like one of the most informative, I did a 3-part series on Morgoth, and I was reminded of it because it was ones that my son watched this morning. But I feel like it has a good summary of the entire First Age within it, explaining Morgoth, because he drives so much of what happens in the First Age. So in terms of scope, that was a fun one because, a lot of people who haven't read the Silmarillion for themselves have a lot of questions about, who's this guy that was Sauron's boss, In terms of fun, I did a couple theory videos. One I did that was, what if Galadriel took the ring? I did another one that's probably my favorite. That's what if Gandalf took the ring? And it was such an interesting way to research because you're researching hypotheticals. And so I look at my calendar of events and I say, okay, Gandalf takes the ring when Frodo offers it to him at Bag End. So then what happens? So then it's a matter of, okay, well, how long does it take to travel from the Shire to Rivendell? Which, I kind of explain why that would be his next logical step. He was already kind of suspicious of Saruman. Rivendell's closer, so he goes to Rivendell. So it's a very backwards way to research when you're researching things like that, because I'll get, a few pages into a script and then I'll discover something and have to delete like the previous half page because I'm like, oh, this theory won't work because, of some little nugget of information. But it also yields some really interesting circumstances, like following the logical timeline of their travels and then also how long they rest in given areas. They would arrive at Isengard within a couple days of the Ringwraiths arriving at Isengard. And so there's naturally a conflict there, which I totally didn't foresee when I set out to do the theory. But it's one of my favorite parts of the theory because, it's math and dates. And I'm like, hey, these are calculations. Like this is actually feasible here. This isn't just me like blowing smoke and making stuff up.
Mm-hmm. So you like the bits where you get to kind of flex your imagination, but also explore the nooks and crannies a bit in ways that you don't normally get to.
Yeah. It's, and I don't do a ton of them, but like when there's an idea, like Gandalf taking the ring is one that, is such a real possibility in that moment. Like it feels like a logical thing for Frodo to do. And, as you're thinking about it, you're like, well, yeah, Gandalf, he's more powerful. Like he's a wizard. He knows all this stuff. Like, why not, take the ring? And, that's when you get a sense for how dangerous this thing is when, he won't. So yeah, that's kind of cool. But then, like I said earlier, honestly, a lot of the most fun things happen after the video's released when it sparks conversation, with my viewers and stuff in the comment section. And I'll sit there, usually for at least an hour after a video releases. And I'm just chatting back and forth with viewers and stuff about, their thoughts or theories or video requests, stuff like that. So, it's just a really fun way to experience the Tolkien community that I didn't foresee happening.
Well, speaking of Tolkien community, we thank you so much for coming and participating in our little section of the community. It's been a wonderful experience to get to know you a little bit better and ask you these questions in person. And I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to stop by.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. This is a lot of fun.
We are so thankful that we have such gracious scholars and fans who want to share their Tolkien experience with us and with you.
We really enjoy making these podcasts, and the fun doesn't stop here.
That's right, it continues on social media. You can find us on Facebook as Tolkien Experience and Twitter as @TolkienEXP. Don't forget to like, follow, share, and comment because we love interacting with you just as much as we enjoy talking to our guests.
For even more content and to join our fellowship of supporters, check out our Patreon by going to patreon.com/Tolkien Experience. Finally, you can also follow our personal Twitter accounts. I'm @Luke B. Shelton.
I'm @SR Westvic.
And I'm @Aaron L. Palmadill. If you have questions or comments, you can send them to us by email at tolkienexperience@gmail.com.
If you want to know more about this week's guest, we provide show notes at tolkienexperience.com. You can find the podcast on all major podcast services, including Apple, Stitcher, and YouTube. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast wherever you listen to it.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, and we truly hope that, in a way, it contributes to your own Tolkien experience.